Welcome to the Giant Step podcast with your host, Maurice Bernstein, as we take you on a journey into music and culture from the world of Giant Step.
Hello, and welcome to another edition of the Giant Step podcast, where we take you on a journey into music and culture. I'm your host, Maurice Bernstein. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Giant Step, and this week's podcast is with Lisa Cortés, the Academy Award-nominated and Emmy-winning producer and director. Lisa started in the music business and then branched out into producing and directing movies and documentaries. But she's always had the thread of telling stories. The interview was originally done on March the 11th, 2021 on our Instagram Live platform. So please excuse any noise glitches or sound issues, because the content is well worth listening to. And if you want to find out more about Giant Step, visit us at our website at giantstep.net or follow us on Instagram at Giant Step. And please send us a message and tell us what you think of our podcast. So now, please enjoy my conversation with the great Lisa Cortés.
There we go.
Whee!
Hi, Lisa.
Maurice, hello. I
How
had
are
a
you?
freak out.
What happened? Tell me.
I'm good, but my internet went out.
Like 5 minutes before we were about to start, right?
Literally, I was like,
Well, I can you hear me okay?
yes, I can.
Perfect. Well, we've got people joining. I'm really happy that you're joining me today on this. For those who don't know, Lisa Cortés is an Academy Award-nominated, Emmy-winning producer and director and the founder of Cortés Films. But you're that and so much more, Lisa. So today I want to get into it and, really talk to you about sort of what you've done in your career and all the amazing contributions you've really made to I'd say culture and art, whether it's music or films. So I think we should get right in it. And I like to start at the beginning. So tell us, Lisa, about sort of your growing up and how you got into music and then eventually into film. So where did you grow up?
I grew up between Harlem and Connecticut. And I grew up between, well, it's like keep going out. Okay. Just this, a really rich cultural stew that my parents gave me. My dad is from Colombia, Afro-Colombian, rich musical tradition of cumbias and Latin culture and African culture. My mom is African-American from here. But music, I think at times my parents didn't always speak the same language, but music was the language that we all spoke and connected. So whether it was, my mom always used to say she would put on Ray Charles, Ingredients in a Recipe for Soul, and she played it 2 times. She could get the house clean by then. And,
Wow.
Whereas my father was rocking, Day and Celia and Latin All-Stars and funk, gospel, and poetry.
Which were some of the poets? Which were some of the poets that he was playing?
Well, it was more my mom. She had come from that tradition of reciting, poems in cottons at her church. So could it be anyone from Langston Hughes to Conte Cullen to Gwendolyn Brooks? And later on, you have, the last poets entering in. And so I think what I got from them is that this whole idea of that, Black folks are not a monolith and we are communicating, telling our stories, and furthering our narrative in so many ways internationally. I saw that big connection, from a very early age. I was very much into musical theater, a very young girl. And then when I went off to college, at a certain point, I always was singing with a band. I had little jazz trios.
Where did you go to school? Where did you go to school?
I went to Yale University.
And what did you study there?
But I also went to, 288 St. Nicholas, 120th University.
Right. That was the jazz jam place, right? That was the jazz club, right?
No, that's where my dad lived.
Oh, okay. Got it. But on St. Nicholas, there was also a jazz club, I seem to remember.
Oh, yeah. There was St. Nick's Pub, which is no longer there in the 150s. And of course, across on 125th Street, there were places like the Baby Grand, where there was musicians coming and playing and people hanging. But, I was a singer. When I was 15, I sang with Count Basie, and in college, I was in groups. And so
you were doing jazz. So you were a jazz singer, would you say? Or was it a mixture of different styles?
It was really jazz. I spent one rebellious teenage summer, I think I was 14, listening to all of Ella Fitzgerald's songbook albums, the Cole Porter songbook, the Gershwin one. I loved Ella's voice. I loved her style. I loved how she could swing, because Ella could swing hard and Ella can swing soft.
Yeah. Yeah. She had those different elements and nuances that were basically effortless for her, which was one of the most incredible things about her. So
I was a jazz singer.
And you were, did you do gospel at all? Did you sing in church?
I had this background growing up between the Catholic and the Baptist church. And definitely the Baptist church had better music. But I didn't sing, there. I did actually sing in an a cappella group. So, I've always been interested in all the different ways, of vocal interpretation of material.
And then, what did you study at college, by the way?
I studied, I studied a lot of different things before I ended with a major. There was that period when I was Near Eastern languages and literature. But ultimately, I could read hieroglyphics like nobody's business, but that's a whole nother podcast.
Oh, I never knew you were a Near Easterner, because I was at, we called it Orientalism in England, a very colonial name for it. But I was at the School of Oriental and African Studies in London. So I never knew that about you. Wow.
What was your language, Maurice? Was it Greek, Latin, or?
At school? Well, it was, I did Islamic law, so it was more Arabic, but I don't speak any Arabic. I just had to learn certain words to just understand sort of legal terms. Yeah. But I can't say, yeah. I know that about you. Wow. Okay. We have that in common too.
But the ultimate, so I took a year off after my sophomore year. I lived in England. I actually had an internship at Parliament, and saw a lot of great music and became my second home.
So you had an internship at the Houses of Parliament?
Yes.
Not with Parliament Funkadelic, who might have been in England.
Well, I kind of feel like I had both.
Yeah.
But I literally at the Houses of Parliament was this crazy time, and just I just took that year off to reset, and when I came back, my major was in American Studies with a concentration in African American literature.
Oh. And then you went back to school. And then when you left school, how did you, I mean, obviously you went into music, right? Straight from school, or there was another twist in the tale?
Well, I was in a band. Well, okay. I went to law school for a day, and then I was in a band. And a dear friend, Lisa Jones-Brown, she was putting together a magazine, and she said, "Hey, do you want to write for the magazine?" And I was like, "Sure." Ideas. And she was like, "Well, like you're into hip hop," because I just was like a hip hop head from day one. Like no one was writing in the late 80s about women in hip hop, but we have always been there. From the beginning, when the first party happened, Kool Herc's sister threw the party that he DJ'd at. And so I wrote this article, and through writing the article, I ended up meeting Bill Adler, the publicist at Def Jam. And I just kept going back there and talking myself into a job. After my stint in the band was called City of Gold. And then I ended up working for both the management company and also for the label.
The management company was Rush Management.
Rush Artist Management. Working.
On Elizabeth, was that in the offices on Elizabeth Street?
298 Elizabeth.
I remember it, yes. I remember it well. And Bill he didn't call himself a publicist. He was the minister of, what did he used to call himself? The minister of information, or like he had a title he used to give himself.
I think it was that, like, to the outside, but he,
right.
We always called him what's amazing about Bill Adler is that, he had been with the company many years and knew the artist so well, but he also had the mainstream press relationships and was such a careful translator to making certain that always the authenticity of the artist and the music and the culture was being shared by these journalists who, for the most part, had nothing in common with the artists, on the label and at the management company. And as you know, it spanned from Run DMC, the Beastie Boys, Houdini, LL Cool J, De La Soul,
Tribe.
No, Tribe was not there. Stetsasonic. For a moment, Jazzy Jeff and the Fresh Prince, like it was the central hub, and of course, Public Enemy, for all of these artists.
And so you were working between Def Jam and Rush Artist Management. What was your role? What were you doing? Because that's actually how we met when you were, we'll get into that in a little bit, but, I met you when you were at Rush.
It was interesting. We didn't have titles. It was like whatever we wanted to be. And so the funny thing that I started doing, come in early in the morning, and I would call all of the international companies that we worked with. For example, London Records put out Run DMC's records there at that time. Paul Oakenfold, Pete Tong. They were really into hip hop, and we were coming to New York and buying records, and they were working at London Records at that time. So I kind of made myself an international liaison. So that then turned into, when we went later on to the artists were touring in Europe, that was how I would then go on. I would go with these tours to, the UK. And then later, I remember we had this great fun tour with all of the R&B artists like Orange and Allison Williams. It was called the Soul Songs Tour. And so I was the tour manager on that. So that's kind of like when I started really listening again, because I lived in the UK. Read the Face magazine.
Right.
I knew a lot about like the music that was happening at one time. But then I had this reintroduction to a new scene that was happening at the end of the 80s that was about dance music and hip hop and this kind of love affair with incorporating and jazz music.
Yeah. And I think it's very interesting that you had the vision of when you were at Rush and Def Jam of understanding the importance of a global, creating global artists. Whereas, I don't think that was really top of mind for a lot of people back then in the United States, because, hip hop was just kind of a New York thing or an American thing. But whether that was something that was going to be able to translate itself globally was, I don't think, always top of mind. But you having the vision to know that it not only had the potential, but it should go like that, I think is very interesting.
What was cool is, I saw that we had some artists who didn't happen in the States. There was a wonderful R&B artist called Tayshaun.
Mm-hmm.
Great,
I
beautiful
love
song.
Tayshaun. Awesome. Yeah.
It's Chasing a Dream. He could live and perform and have his music valued.
No, absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely.
And so I think, for artists, it's always important what you can do to cultivate an international audience. It's so much easier now than it was then, because just because one market is ready to embrace what you're doing doesn't mean that you're doing it wrong.
Yeah, I think that's very true. And it was around that time that's when you and I met. And this was pre-Giant Step. I was a busboy at a restaurant called Trixie's, and you used to come in there and just enjoy the madness that used to entail there. And I remember meeting you there. I was trying to get into the music business, and you invited the whole team whole Trixie staff to go to a television airing at a studio nearby that Public Enemy were performing at, and that was like my first real sort of memory of you.
Well, Trixie's was such a crazy place. I mean, first of all, the owner, Trixie, was like a character. And it was one of these kind of first places that gave, and the menu was a lot of comfort food. Mm-hmm. You could see everybody there from Divine to, I don't know, Spike
Gilbert.
Lee. Yeah. And they also had music, and there was a mm-hmm. piano, and I actually went there and sang a couple of times. When I
in the talent show. Wow.
Quickly discovered, I was like, you know what? I think I need to stick with my day job.
And that's when you sort of gave up music as a career and focused on really working within music.
Yeah, I mean, I think I came in very naive, and to have a career as a artist means that so many stars need to be in alignment. And what I enjoyed in the environment that I was in, because I was there when it was very small at the company, and there was this freedom and fluidity, and there were rules, right. And if anything, what we were all about was respecting the integrity of the music and of the experience of the culture. And, I was always that I remember writing a letter to Fela, and I was like, Houdini has a song called Do the Fela. And, we should you guys should give an endorsement. And I wrote it a little bit more eloquently than that. And they were like, well, we've tried to do things with Sheen, it hasn't worked out. I wrote back to them like, Houdini is not Sheena Easton. You could do things like that. I mean, it was really wonderful to then work on the endorsement deal that Adidas did with Run DMC.
Which was huge. I mean, that literally saved Adidas. They were, yeah.
And so that's kind of when the American studies, looking at culture and the impact of youth culture, all of that kind of informed, conversations and letters written to convince them, because it wasn't an automatic yes. There was a great guy, Angelo Anastasio, who really believed in it. He saw it, the impact of the artists and what they were wearing and that brand endorsement. But it took a minute to convince the folks in Germany to buy in. But what I loved at this time, going back to your question, like, what was your title? Get in where you fit in and create things. And I'm going to be the international person for a moment and connect here and go visit Colombia in the afternoon. And then ultimately I created a company there called Rush Producers Management, where I represented all of the incredible producers affiliated with our artists, from Larry Smith, who had produced Run DMC and Houdini, of course, the Bomb Squad, who worked with Public Enemy, Daddy-O, Prince Paul, Mark the 45 King.
Oh, wow.
These were all the producers that I started representing and introducing them to other companies and getting them, a variety of gigs, from publishing deals to remixes and all of that, an expansion of their voice and, imprint on things.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because back then it really did feel like the Wild West in many ways. And the script was being written as it went along, the birth and the evolution of hip hop culture, because again, it was really a local phenomena in many ways that then spread out. So, these people were the pioneers. There was no blueprint back then.
Yeah. And I think that was, there was always that shock when you were dealing with the corporate structures, you had to kind of reset and reorient your approach at times. As you certainly know, when you then went, having the label that you guys had, it was very different than when you were able to, align with Acid Jazz Records
Yes, definitely. When you in those, you needed the corporate partner because of all the things that you couldn't, distribution, manufacturing, marketing, or these things were important back then. Things have changed a lot now, which is good. But yeah, you had to work with that beast. It was, yeah. And so from Def Jam, what was your next move after Def Jam and Rush?
So I was working with all of the label producers, who were the hottest producers at that time. And, wonderful guy, Gary Harris, introduced me. Gary, rest in peace.
Yes.
He introduced me to Ed Eckstein. At that point had a label called Wing Records.
Yeah.
Tony and Vanessa Williams, which was at Mercury Records. So I was offered this incredible opportunity to become an A&R person at Mercury.
And Mercury, Ed's, a music legend. He worked with Quincy Jones before that, right? At Quest, I think. He'd done some work with Quincy, and also obviously his father. Was an absolute legend.
Great Billy Eckstein.
Yes. And it was interesting because I don't think, was there another African label head back then of a label that was, because Mercury had Bon Jovi on the label, it had a lot of different, I think Rush were on the label, a lot of different artists were there. So was he the first, or am I
Well, as a label president at Mercury, it's interesting. Quincy Jones had been a VP of A&R at Mercury back in
way back when,
in the day.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Ed ultimately became the president at Mercury, then followed by Andre Harrell, who of course had his own label initially, Uptown, and then Motown.
Yeah.
And of course there's Sylvia Rhone. I don't think she was label president then. So,
right.
But certainly within the Mercury system, Ed was the first. And Mercury, you're right, was very much the Scorpions, Bon Jovi, Mellencamp, a lot of artists like that. And then, but they also had like Angela Winbush. There was a strong, and of course there was a back catalog that was really strong.
Incredible,
with
yeah.
Incredible R&B artists. But I think Ed brought like new wind to the sails, obviously with Vanessa Williams. We had Alita Adams, and Tony, which of course Dwayne Wiggins and Raphael.
Raphael, yeah.
And, just like right there, you're seeing such great innovation in the music.
I remember you guys put out this amazing sampler. I think in about 90 or 90, Tony were on there, and a bunch of, just a great CD sampler, which was awesome, of the music on Mercury. Some old stuff on there as well.
You're talking about the one that was like a daisy, and then the sampler was in the middle.
Yes, exactly.
And it had, it also had, because, Ed had signed, the comedian, Robin, what's his name? I've forgotten. Oh gosh.
Robin Williams?
Put it in the chat.
Robin Williams?
Yeah. A-Base Kids.
Oh, right. Yes. Yeah.
And so it also had I put that CD together, and it had interstitial comedy bits from Robin Harris.
Yeah.
That was, on there. I understand it's become a collector's item. And
it was awesome, that CD.
They've paid a lot of money for it.
I wish I still could find it. It was such a great selection of music on there. It was amazing. So, as you know, Mercury, you were doing A&R there. Who were some of the artists that you were working with?
Ultramagnetic MCs, I re-signed. Of course, Black Sheep, Dresden Long, Buju Banton, the cast recording of Jelly's Last Jam, Reggie Gaines. Spoken word record.
Yeah, of course.
Those, like, a very interesting selection of artists and projects that, as an A&R person, I was a part of.
And then also, because Mercury was a part of Polygram back then, in the UK, there was a sub-label that was part of Mercury UK called Talking Loud. So talk a little bit about that, because you were one of the very early supporters of that label. And again, sort of, you had that international eye, which, because I remember when Talking Loud, they couldn't get arrested in New York, but you were probably their big supporter back then.
Yeah. I feel like I was in the UK for a conference, and I met the folks at Talking Loud, Giles Peterson, my dear friend Carolyn Peed, who was in promotion there. You just posted something.
Norman J. Norman J. Yeah.
It was like this.
Yeah.
Yes. Small and mighty team. And I probably heard Young Disciples first. And then, of course, followed by Omar, and then
Galliano,
Incognito, Galliano. it kind of spoke to those kind of two sides of me, like the rhythm, the hip hop, and then the with this serious jazz music. It was this perfect blending, and with like deep soul. When you think of the musicianship in Young Disciples and Carterson's voice and her lineage and what she brought to that trio, I just thought it was really incredible. And I guess I was always kind of a backpack rap and, Tribe and what Primo and Guru did together, like that. I saw that there was this parody, there was this beautiful way that hip hop and jazz be in conversation with one another, because in many ways they were exploring the same terrain. And I just felt like the Talking Loud label, the artists who did that. It was great to work with you and your team, bringing the artists over here to perform and really evangelizing for that music to have a place, because, it's still great comfort music for me to, kick back and listen
to. But the real challenge which we were facing was that when with a major record label, when you had the Young Disciples or a Galliano, they were so used to, on the sort of marketing, the promotion side, going through the channels, the usual channels. And this didn't go. Now you're able to be a multi-channel, multi-genre artist, and everybody gets it and they know what to do with it. Back then, if it didn't fit into that little pigeonhole, they just did not know what to do, and they'd be scratching their heads, and it was easier for them not to do anything. And I felt it was a constant battle of just trying to, take a chance, take it to urban radio, see what happens. I mean, I think a lot of resistance back then I used to find.
That's the plus and the minus. It's so performance based in terms of, how many ads did we get? Are we, how many spins did we get? And in those type of settings, there's not a lot of space for development. I'd love to say that where we are now is because in terms of acceptance and, these artists who are mixing so many different genres together, is a result of the seeds, though, that were planted then. Those artists actually now, in many cases, have greater followings and rediscovery than when they were released.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I think it definitely, you've got to have sort of like the people who laid the groundwork for the ability to, but it was very tough. And because, there was no other network. And I think one of the things that we managed to do is we had to create our own network on a global level, because we were never going to get onto mainstream urban radio. We were always going to have a problem, trying to get mainstream retail to accept us, because, they're all about shifting units at the end of the day, and the same with the sales team. And so I think a lot of people's careers suffered, to make the ability for this shift to happen. So I think that's absolutely correct.
But the cool thing that came out of it was, I think, two things that really hit me talking to you. One is community. Like, we developed community. We figured out, if I'm going to Oakland, if I'm going to Birmingham, if I'm going to Tokyo, who are the people who are supporting, who might not be on the radio. They might have the cool clothing store that, Correct. Can do cocktail hours and pop-ups. And I think cool how that then has turned into this kind of, marketing approach where we look at a culture and figure out what are the different touch points and entryways that we can build a brand from, which I think is one of the genius things that you've done at Giant Step.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, we had to, because you're absolutely right. It was about going into a market and what's the coolest clothing store that is selling, the cool streetwear. What's that little independent record store that might be no bigger than a closet, but the people who go there are the people you want to get to. What is that little club? What is the radio station, that college radio station? And from there, you build that network, you join the dots, and then all of a sudden you have this real connection and community, and that grows. Again, this is all before internet and social media. It's a lot easier to join the dots now. But yeah, I totally agree with you. So, you then set up your own you set up your own imprint label, Loose Cannon, right? Which was the time that we had because we were kind of like, we were frenemies when we had our labels, I would say, because we needed to support each other, because there were few people who had the vision and the thinking that we had. But also we were going after a lot of the same artists because we knew what talent was. So it was quite funny back then. As we were laughing about last week when we were talking, we would have our own little bidding wars with each other. And instead of it being a major label bidding war, it'd be like, I'll raise you $10,
I'll raise you $11.
Yeah. Damn, I'm out, so.
The incredible artist, Lisa Anderson,
yes.
Was amazing. Someone I remember that we were both super passionate about.
Oh my God, yeah. And you won. You beat me to it. So,
$15.
Yes. Yeah, I know. I couldn't raise it above 14. So, yeah. So you left the music business, and you decided to shift into film, right? It was like you just had enough and went into film. Was that an easy shift to make, or was it something that you found as a very natural?
I think I got to a certain point, and in that environment, it was challenging, and it was time to move on, and I kind of lost the joy of being in music, and I really reset my life on all levels. In a movie theater in India, taking like a, off the grid sabbatical, and I didn't know what they were talking about in the movie, but I knew what was happening. And I was like, that's where I want to go. Because I was yearning and seeking a bigger platform to communicate, to tell stories, to elevate different voices. And that's when I set off on the path to, as a filmmaker, going back to film school, interning, volunteering all over the place, working with student filmmakers and independents and film festivals, and figuring out how I could transfer my skill sets as someone who could identify a voice, figure out how to get it done, and deliver it. And so, it took time. It didn't happen overnight, of serious hustling. And then one day I got a call, and an old friend of mine, I'm going to New Orleans, and come join me on this adventure. You can work with me. I'm producing, and you can work with the director. And that call was from Lee Daniels. That film was Monsters Ball. The director was Mark. And
an amazing movie.
It just opened a whole nother path.
So that was the first major movie that you worked on, Monsters Ball. That was
after working with a lot of really incredible folks like Seth Rosenfeld, who gave me a lot of opportunities to, on his projects, and the Urban World Film Festival that I worked there for a bit. Monsters Ball was the first big film. It was a film that was done with Lionsgate. And after that, the success of that film, when we saw that there was so much more for the company to do, that's when we really revved up Lee Daniels Entertainment as a production company. And our next film after that was The Woodsman. And
that's a very dark film. But an amazing movie. Kevin Bacon, right? Kevin Bacon. Yeah.
Mos Def, who I had worked with on the music side, who was then in Monsters Ball, because I was like, guys, you got to look at this guy, Mos Def. He's amazing. He's, he can do anything. So we did 2 films with him. Eve is in The Woodsman also. And David Alan Grier, Benjamin Bratt. And so that was when the production company came to, it was like being back at Def Jam again. We raised the money, we sold the rights internationally, we told the story we wanted to, and sold it afterwards. I just love that spirit, and all of the film in, the 10 years that I was producing with Lee, and that I could transfer my skills as a visionary, as a producer, from music to film.
And you haven't mentioned one of the most amazing films that you did with Lee, which was Precious.
Years in the making. Yeah. It was a film that we fell in love with when it first came out in the 90s.
Very brave film to make. It was a very brave film to make.
But nitty gritty, raw and real. I think there is a
very much so
need for content that is authentic and heartfelt. And after Lee's directorial debut, Shadow Boxer, that I produced, the author of Push, which is the book that Precious is based on, was like, you know what? I'm down. I'm going to give you the rights. And we set off, and we have found Gabourey Sidibe and her incredible talent and beautiful heart to really center and be the emotional spine. And of course,
I remember seeing, Monique was incredible in it too. Yeah. I remember seeing it at the New York Film Festival. I think it was the New York debut of the movie, and the after party at the Plaza, which I remember seeing you at, and walked to the after party, and you were sitting at a table with Robert De Niro, and you got up to say hello to me, and I was like, I couldn't believe that you got up from sitting with Robert De Niro to say hello to me. That was so sweet. It was like a very nice moment for me. So you set up Cortés Films.
Yeah, so after 10 years, once again, time to move on. I wanted to tell different stories. I wanted to think once again about where do we want to shine the light? Where is my passion leading me? And so that led me to start my own company and, really diversify my portfolio. First as a producer and now as a producer director, to go to Curacao and make a film with the incredible Ernest Dickerson, are all some of the early things that I did through the company, and that excite me.
Yeah, and in the last few years, it's a longer tail when you're making a film. I mean, it can take years, but as far as releases are concerned, you've been pretty prolific over the last few years in some of the releases, and I've seen a lot of them and really enjoyed them. I'd love to talk a little bit about some of them because they are, just very relevant and poignant. So the first one I want to talk about is All In, The Fight for Democracy, which is, about Stacey Abrams and her battle against voter suppression. Obviously, that is a very timely topic, especially as what just happened in Atlanta last week. So I'd love to hear a little bit about, the making of that film and what it meant to you. And just your thoughts on sort of like somebody like Stacey and what she did and is doing.
So All In, The Fight for Democracy, available on Amazon Prime, is a film on the history of voting rights and voter suppression and Stacey Abrams' 2018 gubernatorial run. I directed the film with the incredible Liz Garbus, and we produced it together with Stacey and Dan Kogan. The film was Stacey's idea. She, after 2018 run, a lot of people came to her, filmmakers, and like, we're going to tell you the story. And she's like, no, to tell my story, there's a bigger story. And she also felt that, if people didn't like her tree in the forest, it might keep them away from understanding this history, but also understanding what progress could look like. I could not turn down the invitation to join this dream team. I am so keenly aware of the shoulders that I stand on. My parents, my grandparents, etc. They've been freedom fighters and warriors on both sides of my family time. And this was my attempt to continue through my art and my activism, and in a really powerful intersection, not only with the film, but also with the impact campaign that we developed. And, we've been able to reach like 80 million Americans with the film. But also what in our communities, what we can do. Voting rights, voter suppression, it's like a monster movie. You think you've cut the head off of the monster. You think with the passage of, the 15th Amendment granting the franchise to African-American men and Rican, that progress was being made. And then, of course, there's the pushback and the violent intimidation and the rise of the Ku Klux Klan. And cycle keeps going on and on and on. We had the tremendous triumph on January 5th, in Georgia. And then look what happened on January 6th with the next day. The Confederate flag in our capital. Yeah. There's been over 243 laws that have been introduced thus far. Right now, back on voting rights and access, and they are targeted on communities of brown, Black folks. Yeah. It is not random. And so if we are not represented, we cannot be a part of the necessary change in our access for education, for health, for parity in our wages. So as you can tell, this film is very alive for me. It's not in the past tense. It is very much in conversation with this moment that we find ourselves in now.
Yeah, especially what just happened in Georgia. I think it was last week or early this week, where they're literally, the changing of the laws. We don't have a lot of time, and there's so much more I want to talk about as well. So I wanted to just talk to you a little bit about two other documentaries that you did recently: the Remix, Hip Hop and Fashion, and then also the Apollo Theater. So, the Remix, Hip Hop Fashion really was maybe going back to your roots when you were at Def Jam in many ways, because these were people who were working while you were working in many ways, so talk a little bit about that and the two people who you focused on in that, Misa and April.
Yeah, so the remix Hip Hop Times Fashion, which is on Netflix, is about kind of the untold story and the contributions of women in hip hop fashion that also influenced global fashion. Misa Hilton,
Absolutely.
April Walker. And it's part of, I think you can see I get these obsessions up. So, I started this obsession I wrote this article about women in hip hop, and then it was
way
kind of
back.
Yeah. I want to make certain that, our stories are always being shared and that, the history is written to encompass. And that was the journey on with that. It's so interesting when you start to connect the dots of, the innovation and the design, and then how this design from April, from Misa gets co-opted. They're not given credit. But I think there's, the full circle moment. I'm so happy with what Misa's doing with IMG and what April is doing with her line, and just this new focus on what's happening with their talent. It's the Apollo is a doc directed by the incredible Roger Ross Williams. It's on HBO. Looking at,
and I went to see it at the Apollo, which was great. Actually, seeing it at the Apollo when they showed it.
Yeah, I was so happy you came, and it was really special. That was a screening we did for the community, with the Apollo. It's not only the story of this institution, but it's also about the intersection of our voice, about how, our music, our art is connected to our struggle. And we are resilient and we find ways to express our pain and joy in equal parts. And for me, I can never separate the art, because I think they both feed off of one another. And I think, when we look at the music, when we look, championing, jazz funk artists or reggae artists, or, things that might not be mainstream, but ultimately become mainstream. I'm really honored to be able to have the trust of so many artists in different genres and modalities of creating to, rally and find platforms to tell their stories, and to make certain that the history that's told is from a unique perspective, a perspective filled with lots of heart and love, but that is authentic to the individual, to the culture.
Yeah. And I remember watching the Apollo film. I learned so much about the Apollo because it's kind of, you think you know about that institution because you look at the walls and you see all the pictures of the different artists and the mosaics and everything. But that documentary taught me like a lot. It was fascinating. I loved it. We only have a couple of minutes, and I really want to, there's a film that you're making that I really want to get into with you, and that is the Little Richard documentary. Because he is, we talk about iconic, ahead of his time leader, and really who didn't get his just deserves. Talk to us about that documentary, and when's that coming out? What's the status of it?
Little Richard, I Am Everything is a great passion project. It is part of the desire to reset history and provide a lot of information on how Richard is, his important part of the structural integrity of rock and roll.
Absolutely.
He is the mother, father, king, queen. As he said, I am everything. And really about giving him his flowers and having his voice guide us through his story from Macon, Georgia, to Tutti Frutti, to teaching the Beatles and the Rolling Stone, and his
Jimi Hendrix,
and his great love of Jimi Hendrix and his band, James Brown filling in from him when he was very young, and then so that is something that I'm starting a little bit. I'm working now on a documentary called The Empire of Ebony on Johnson Publishing and their seminal magazines, Ebony and Jet, the tremendous visual archive that they created. And, once again, what it is to be a Black capitalist, a Black entrepreneur, as Eunice and John Johnson were, and how they rewrote our history, representation of the souls of Black folks through their work.
Yeah, and those magazines, iconic magazines, which, again, were, trailblazing. And I think I went to the Ebony offices in Chicago a few years ago when my friend Amy was there. And just looking at the walls and looking at the covers was just, it was mind blowing, just to see how they, that was history,
They had a building. Mr. Johnson bought the land. He built a building designed by a Black architect. That's, there's not many other people who've planted a flag like that.
No, I mean, so when are you planning to release these?
2022.
Awesome. Well, Lisa, we have I think a minute left. Is there anything else you want to add that you didn't get a chance to say?
Well, I want to thank you for your friendship and support through the years, and for being in the struggle to broaden the voices and artists who have had a platform. For anyone who's watching, I just stay well, to take a moment to breathe and reset and center. And I look forward to seeing you all on the dance floor really soon.
Me too. Absolutely. Lisa, this has been amazing. You are an inspiration, and I can't wait to see, the Little Richard and the Johnson documentary, and everybody go and see, the remix in the All in the Fight for Democracy, Stacey Abrams as well, and the Apollo documentary, because they're all awesome. Thank you for joining, everyone. Lisa, thank you again, and we'll see everyone soon. Take care. Bye-bye. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to the Giant Step podcast. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe or follow us on Instagram at Giant Step. Music is by Sinego. Please also visit our website, giantstep.net, to learn more about our award-winning marketing agency.